All right, everyone, we're going to get started. So we are recording. So if we could have everyone be quiet in the room, otherwise it's really difficult for people to hear online. So this special meeting of council is being held to consider, among other topics, the proposed South Beach RV Park. In a moment, we will begin with an introduction from the CAO, followed by a presentation from the proponent. This will be followed by an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions of council. Council will discuss the proposal in committee of the whole, and after discussion may choose to take action on the matter. First, I would like to take this opportunity to establish the process that will be followed this evening. As chair of the meeting, all questions should be directed to me. At a total of 30 minutes will be available for the public to ask questions. And I'm going to add a little something that wasn't on the script. Normally we allow 15, but we have given an extra 15 minutes because we knew it would be a topic that people would have a lot of questions on. Any members of the public that are attending in person and want to speak must sign up on the speakers list. For those attending via Zoom, please ensure that your first and last name are clearly indicated and use the raise hand function to indicate your wish to speak. So you can start doing that now as the corporate officer is taking the list of names for online speakers. And to ensure that council is able to hear from a broad range of perspectives, please limit your introductory comments and do not repeat questions that have already been asked. I will be calling on both in-person and online attendees to speak one at a time. When you are called upon by the chair, please state your name and community of residence for the record. The corporate officer will start a timer and you will have a maximum of 1 minute to state your question. When you hear the beep at 50 seconds, it's time to wrap up your comments promptly. Respectful behavior is expected.
Well, there's Jenny.
Disorderly conduct will not be tolerated. Regardless of whether you favor or oppose any particular statement or question, please refrain from applause or other expressions of emotion. Restraint enables others whose views may not coincide with your own to exercise their right to express their views and enables all views expressed to be heard in an impartial a forum as possible. So we'll get started with our meeting, and we always start with our land acknowledgement. So we respect and recognize the First Nations within whose unceded lands the village of Kaslo is situated, including the Tanaka and Sinixt people and the Indigenous and Métis residents of our community. So we'll call the meeting to order officially at 6:03. And at this time, I'd like to call on CAO Baker to provide an overview of the proposal.
Here it is. Hurry up.
If people could please be muted if you're online, thank you.
I am muted, but we've got 94.
Okay, right. Okay, sorry. It's a little different with a whole bunch of people and having to read the script. So we will move to the adoption of the agenda. The recommendation is that the agenda of the special meeting of council be adopted as amended to include the late item, which is the curling club grant. Moved by Councillor Bird, seconded by Councillor Lang. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion is carried. So now we'll go to CAO Baker.
Mayor Hewitt, people were excited that I was speaking, but no silence. So council has a staff report that's part of your regular or your special council meeting, but part of this committee of the whole is for me to provide you with a summary of that information and an opportunity to ask any questions that might come up. Purpose of that staff report is to provide council information and then seek direction in regards to the RV park proposal, and in particular, the conditions that would be part of a purchase and sale agreement. As a background, council passed a resolution in August to finalize the conditions of an agreement. And soon after, and I believe it was mid-September or late September, there was a site tour. Council and the developer met on site to look at the lands. And following that, there was an updated appraisal and sketch plan provided. The purpose of that updated appraisal and sketch plan was because we wanted to remove the 20-meter road right of way at the highway. The village didn't want to buy that land from the developer. We wanted the developer to provide it because they ultimately would be providing it at the time of subdivision. So council believed it was fair to subtract that from the net land transfer area. Since then, there's been some negotiation, in particular with respect to the lakefront, and there's numerous conditions that are contained in that staff report that would form part of the purchase and sale agreement. So if council agrees to those conditions that are in that staff report, which I'm going to go through as part of my summary here, then staff can also be directed by council to finalize the purchase and sale agreement. What would happen then is the developer would provide the village with a deposit, and both parties, the village and the developer, would begin working on conditions that are the basis for that purchase and sale agreement. Land disposition would be a primary consideration. So the village owns road allowances and the developer would like them. And in exchange, they've offered land to the village. Land near the highway, some land along the river, and land along the lake shore. The final net land transfer area, so the amount of land that the developer would transfer to the village, minus the land that the village would give the developer, would leave a surplus, so to speak, in the village's favor. So there would be cash also provided to the village in addition to the land exchange. The exact amount of that land transfer and consequently the amount of money has not been determined. And there's reasons for that that we'll talk about as part of this summary. If I could have an image put up.
You'll have to turn
Sorry
around if you
about
want to
that.
see the image on the screen. And I'll take this moment to just make sure that everyone online is able to hear. Is there anyone who isn't able to hear? I see several thumbs up, so that's great. Thank you.
Yes, I can hear.
The image that we're going to put on the screen is the approximate land transfer area. We'll explain the colors.
Is this going to be visible to those watching online?
Yeah.
This was this is the most recent sketch plan. It's approximate. It's not precise and accurate. You can see the road allowances that the village currently owns, which are within the middle of the subject lands. And in the top right-hand corner, there's a brown shaded area. That's the 20-meter wide road right-of-way that the developer currently owns. That would be effectively given to the village. The yellow is land that, not all of it, but most of it there would be transferred to the village. So it surrounds the road right of way up by the highway in the top right corner. There's a medium-sized piece of land along the river that the village would own, and then a very small piece where the river and the lake intersect. The council's also requested that the developer dedicate a strip of land along the lake shore to the village to provide public access. So that would be the long yellow strip that's along the lake shore, the southernmost part of the graphic. It's not intended for that land along the lake shore, that 15-meter strip, to be part of the land exchange. The only part that would be part of the land exchange would be the red road allowances in exchange for the other yellow areas that the developer owns. So you can sense that there's a surplus of land, or sorry, a surplus of more land would go to the developer than to the village. And so that's where the financial compensation comes into play.
Stupidly excited for my birthday, like not stupidly crazy. Just like, I get excited for my birthday. And frankly, I'm like,
Can people online,
like it's,
please
I'm so
mute?
blah this year. Like Christmas, I cannot get it.
Mhm.
So I said yes to tonight because I'm like, I need to not.
Mhm.
Okay,
We're good. Yeah, I think we found our.
okay, so.
Village of Kaslo is muted. Can't hear you.
Sorry.
It's still muted.
Corporate officer is working on getting the
I think we're good.
sound working.
So the developers propose that they construct a multi-use path from the highway to the entrance to the RV park along the river, so that the public could have access along the way, along the river. And then from the cul-de-sac, so to speak, or roundabout where the RV park entrance would be, they would then construct another walkway from that point along the river all the way to the lake. So it effectively provide public access to the river and down to the lake shore. And all of that would be at their cost. The construction of it would be permitted within the constraints of an environmental report or assessment, environmental impact assessment. When it comes to lakeshore access, earlier this year, the developer offered a statutory right-of-way to the village that would provide the public with access. Be marked to denote that it's a public path and can be used. And council was agreeable, however, has recently decided that it would prefer a 15-meter strip of land to be dedicated for that public access. The developer has agreed under the condition that access for a boat launch can be provided through a license or a lease or an easement, which you can see in the picture that's on the screen. It's denoted by a dotted black line, the approximate location. And so one of the questions that's before council is whether that's agreeable. Village receives a 15-meter right-of-way and would grant a license of occupation agreement or easement for that non-motorized boat launch to exist. Another consideration for council is the zoning amendment bylaw 1298 that was presented to council in late 2023 and received first reading. Staff have refrained from scheduling a second reading until the conditions of an agreement have been decided. So in essence, if there's no land exchange, then it's possible that the rezoning is irrelevant. Certainly the landowner, the developer could still request the rezoning to proceed, but it makes good sense to figure out if the land transfer is going to happen and decide how to proceed from there. Another consideration for council, it has been public engagement. So a public hearing on the proposed bylaw number 1298 for rezoning, it's not required to have a public hearing. The rezoning would be consistent with the official community plan, be permitted, and so a public information session was the preferred option for council. That occurred in November 2023. The developer provided information on their proposal to the public, collated that information, summarized it, and provided it to council so that council knew what, at the time, the public's concerns were, or if they were in support of it. And council's now had that for a year, and it was also attached to the staff report that's provided, written on December 12th. Council can decide that it wants another public information session to occur. And the reason for that might be that council feels more public input is needed, that they haven't received sufficient public input over the last year. With respect to the conditions that would appear in the purchase and sale agreement, there are conditions which the village would require to be met in order for the transaction to be completed. There's conditions which the developer would want to be met in order for transfer to be completed. And then of course there's conditions that both parties would want to be met. Just gonna highlight all of them for you. When it comes to the village, conditions that the village would want would be a land survey that's performed that withstands the scrutiny of the village, and in particular the location of the natural boundary, as that dictates where the lake protection area would be and the 15-meter strip of land that would be granted to the village. And it would also possibly influence the net land transfer area. The calculation of that net land transfer area should be performed by a third party. So it's been performed already by the developer's consultant, but a good practice would be to have a third party confirm that it all makes sense. The village would also have a condition that it receives fair compensation for the net land transfer area based on the appraiser's estimated fair market value that's been noted as $52,500 per acre. The lake protection setback area, so that 15-meter strip of land along the lake, it's not intended for that to be included in the calculation. The village would like to own the stream and lake protection setback areas. So that means the 30 meters along the river and the 15 meters along the lake. The developer has already conducted archaeological, environmental, flood hazard, and sewerage dispersal assessments, and these have been reviewed by the village, but not with final approval. So the village would provide further scrutiny of those assessments, and ultimately the developer would be asked to abide by all the recommendations that have been made by these professionals: environmental, archaeological, flood hazard, sewerage. The developer would also be asked to comply with the Environmental Management Act for contaminated sites regulations, so that relates to previous use of the land. The village would issue notice to adopt a road closure bylaw for those road allowances and a notice of disposition for the road allowances. When the village issues those notices, it's intended to prompt public input. So any input received, email, letters, or through representations at council meetings would be provided to council. The village would also refer this development to various ministries: Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Environment, perhaps the Ministry or the interior health, and approval of the road closure bylaw and support from the ministries would be required in order for council to adopt those bylaws. If the road closure bylaw could not be adopted for whatever reason, well, then the purchase and sale agreement cannot be completed. Second and third readings of the proposed bylaw 1298 would be required. So to date, we've only had first reading. We need second and third reading. And at second reading, council could decide to further regulate the C4 commercial recreation RV camping zone. Could come in the form of limiting the number of RV sites, limiting the RV park to seasonal use, or allowing certain types of storage or disallowing storage altogether. Council could choose to conduct a public hearing as part of the process. However, the public has already been given an opportunity to provide input on the zoning through the OCP development and the OCP bylaw adoption process that occurred in 2022. And since the proposed bylaw is congruent with the OCP, council is not required to have a public hearing, and staff would suggest that a public hearing is not the most appropriate or necessary method for looking for public input. Walkways and pathways along the river would need to be constructed by the developer at their expense. The road that's being constructed from the highway to the RV park would be at the developer's expense. The village would need to be satisfied with the developer's Indigenous peoples consultation. So what that might mean is not simply that there's been an effort to reach out to Indigenous peoples and nothing was heard back, but that there actually was some form of communication that went back and forth. The developer has some conditions. They would need to be satisfied with the condition of the road allowances that they would ultimately receive. They would also need to be satisfied with any conditions being imposed by the village's approving officer for consolidation of the lots and the Bearland Strata subdivision plan that they would propose. When it comes to conditions that both parties would need to agree to, it would be the net area of land exchange, the terms of a service right-of-way for raw water line that would go from the lake up to the golf course, and then registering these right-of-ways on title or titles. After second and third readings occur for the proposed bylaw, council would need to adopt the bylaw. If the bylaw is not adopted, then again, the agreement couldn't be completed. Both parties would need to agree to any RV park regulations that could be enacted through the zoning bylaw, or it could be an entirely separate RV park regulation bylaw. Both parties would need to agree. There could even be covenants that are placed on title to ensure that there's adherence to the regulations. If a bylaw is involved, then the public would have an opportunity to provide input for council's consideration. The regulations could include number of RV sites, seasonal use, watering restrictions, or the amenities. Point being that the village would have considerable control on regulating what the RV park might look like. The approving officer would then need to approve of consolidating the lots and the subdivision plan, and there could be other conditions at that point. Important to note that the application for a development permit, that would occur just before construction, generally speaking. It's not part of the purchase and sale agreement. Outside of it. It would occur after the land transfers occurred and the exchange has closed. There could be other conditions that apply at the time that a development permit is applied for. So if you're familiar with the official community plan, you know that there's restrictions that are in place on the development permit area for the stream or the lake. And so all of that would come into effect at that time. With respect to legislation and policies and bylaws, there's been some confusion or conversation with respect to the village's OCP and how it applies to the proposed RV park. And so the information I'm going to share is intended to help differentiate between different areas that are mentioned in the OCP. In particular is the waterfront development area. We'll put a image up on the screen. Waterfront development area affects the subject lands. Once it appears on the screen, you'll see that it's depicted in red. It also affects lands that are in Kaslo Bay, all the way down to the SS Moy. So they're all waterfront development areas. And when you read the OCP, it'll tell you the restrictions that are in place for the waterfront development area. I believe, well, we'll get to them in a sec. The other area to note on this map that's displayed is the yellow striated lines that depict development permit area. There's further restrictions that the village has in place if work is to occur in those areas. You can think of the waterfront development area and the development permit area as kind of like Russian dolls. So the DPA, development permit area, is within the waterfront development area. It further restricts what can occur. The next Russian doll, the smaller one, would be one that's been identified by the environmental impact assessment. And it identifies stream and lake protection areas. So they're within the development permit area. If we refer to the OCP section 11, there's recognition of the importance of waterfront and identifies policies that are there to promote a balance between development and tourism, recreational amenities, attainable housing, the environment, and cultural stewardship, as well as the prevention of unregulated marine development and the mitigation of climate change impacts. As it relates to the RV park, development on a floodplain within the waterfront development area is limited to seasonal campgrounds and RV parks. So the subject lands are on a floodplain. So that means campgrounds and RV parks are the limited use. With respect to development permit areas, it's covered in section 16 of the OCP. It includes the village's stream and lakefront development permit areas. And if you read section 16, it details or describes the qualities of the public realm, safety amenities, and an effectively functioning local ecosystem desired for specific parts of the village. Kind of wordy. And if we were to dive into it, section 16.4 and section 16.5 would give specific restrictions for work along a stream and work along the lake. Section 16.4 relates to the lake and states that development in these areas is limited to passive recreational amenities, including walking and multi-use trails, natural park areas, non-motorized pleasure craft launches, and park benches. The Lakefront Protection DPA includes properties that are within 30 meters of the natural boundary of Kootenay Lake, as well as certain upland areas beyond that threshold that are integral to the lakeshore ecosystem or are at risk of erosion or inundation. And so when we're looking at the image that's on the screen, The striated area is the lakefront protection DPA. And in the southernmost part, you can see that it includes 30 meters from the natural boundary of the lake. And that as you head inland, towards the river, the DPA moves inland. It's far greater than 30 meters. So that's out of respect for the ecosystem that extends beyond the 30 meters. Section 16.5 of the OCP is related to the stream or the river, Kaslo River, and includes properties that are within 30 meters of the natural boundary. The stream and lakefront protection development permit areas should not be confused with the stream and lake protection areas that are part of the environmental impact assessment. DPAs are part of the village's official community plan, whereas the stream and lake protection areas are not. They're referenced in the environmental impact assessment that was developed by EcoScape Environmental Consultant. So with respect to the environmental impact assessment, the developer would be required to apply for a development permit. So once the land transfers occurred, there's been rezoning, all of it's settled, the village owns the land along the lake and the river, assuming that proceeds. Then before construction could occur, the developer would apply for a development permit because the works would occur within the striated line that's in the image. And the OCP has guidelines. Other considerations that are worth reviewing with council would be the public input that's been received over the last year. One of the questions council's asked to consider is whether it believes that public input is sufficient. Environmental protection and public access to the river and lake have also been key concerns for the village, and the village and the developer have worked to try to address those concerns by dedicating land along the river and the lake shore. Economic development is another consideration for council. So if council believes that it's received sufficient public input, then it's asked to consider whether the conditions identified for environmental protection, public access to the water, and regulation of the RV park amenities are agreeable. And if they're not, then staff can be directed to go away and work through further conditions that it would like to see put in place, or perhaps more information that it would like staff to gather. And so council has some options at this point. It could endorse the conditions that are presented through the staff report and would be reflected in the purchase and sale agreement, and then direct staff to execute the agreement. Or council could reject the land transfer altogether and decide that it's not in the public best interest, or it's simply not compatible with the official community plan. At that point, the proposal would be dead in the water. Third option would be for council to hold a decision in abeyance and request for another public information session to occur, or for staff to provide more information that would help with decision making, including more information. I believe that summarizes the key points of the staff report.
So I will go to council now, as is our usual practice, for any questions for the CAO on his report. Mr. Brown.
So in terms of new information from that report, the easement for a boat launch is new information that we haven't had before prior to this time. Is the decision that we are being asked to make, will this easement for this boat launch be affected in any way by the decision that we're making? In terms of any time that I'm given new information that I haven't had time to consider prior to our meeting, which I've had, quite a bit of time to consider, I usually would like to take time to consider that. And if this specific thing is going to affect the motion that we're voting on, then that would be pertinent information that I'd like to understand.
David, I suggest maybe when we hear from the developer, they might add some more context to that. Would that be an accurate statement?
Mary,
Mhm. Any other questions, Councillor, at this time? Councillor Brown.
In the crosshatch section, that you referred to as a development permit area. Simple yes or no, would RV park be a permittable use in that area?
through the chair, I believe the staff report provides specific information. If you give me a moment, I can reference it specifically. So under section 7 of the staff report, legislation, policy, bylaw considerations, and specifically policy, the guidelines for development within that protection area state that it's limited to passive recreational amenities, such as walking and multi-use trails, natural park areas, non-motorized pleasure craft launches, and park benches. So that yellow striated area means that the developer is not permitted to construct its RV park or a motorized boat launch within that DPA. And so the RV park boundary, generally speaking, would stop at the development permit area. And any work that does occur within the DPA would be subject to the environmental impact assessment.
Through the chair, so would it be correct then that aspects of the plan presented to us would be within that striated area and therefore not a permitted use in that area?
Through the chair, I believe the point that's being considered, council is being asked to consider at this point, one of them is the land transfer. So the actual design, specific design, so not the conceptual design, but the actual design of what will go where has not been determined because the land transfer has not occurred. And so we haven't gone down the path of development permit application being received and all those conditions being hashed out.
So now we'll move into our next information item, and maybe for the benefit of those who haven't seen it, if we can get, which isn't normal practice, but we'll have the corporate officer call up the letter from the South Beach Working Group. So everyone has an opportunity to see that. Although it is a part of the package, so you would have access to it online.
Much larger, so it can be read in sections.
Thank you.
Everybody gonna have to ask you to not, because it's hard for people online to hear when there's too much talk in the room. No matter. So now we have Ed Raffoni from CTQ Consultants who will present to council on behalf of the proponent. Ed, you want to come up? You'll have to come closer to the table so you can be,
Right here? Good. Okay, Your Worship, we just found out today actually from Robert that we had the opportunity, which is great, to be able to present. We thought we would just be here to comment on anything that came up or questions that came through the chair or through and Robert to us to answer, to touch on. I'd like to do both if I have the time, and just run you back to the beginning of time, and some of those will dispute and refute what was just came out here, and Robert, I think, will agree with that, because this exercise has gone through 2 administrators at least, and 5 years' time now has passed. And this gentleman here, Councillor, did indicate that things have changed. They haven't changed that much. The launch was in that proposal right from day one. I just want to mention that. It's not new at all. And it's permitted under federal and provincial legislation. The municipality can determine certain things relative to that, but the province has the final say on whether you can have 1 boat launch per waterfront property, which could happen here. Also, we have Marianne, just wanted to mention, Marianne Olson Russello from Ecoscape. It was one of the senior biologists on the project, online right now. She couldn't make it out, so I apologize for that. But here, myself, Ed Graffoni, senior planner, that's been involved from day one when Mr. Dunlop was here, and Dave Cullen, senior engineer and partner with CTQ out of Kelowna as well. So we're well versed in all of this kind of stuff, but remembering again, we had, as I'll mention in a moment, we had several specialized consultants involved in this project from several years ago to help us deal with the situation. Remembering that any project, whether it's residential, a park, an industrial, a commercial, it evolves as a result of all kinds of input and legislative controls that the municipality has, the province has, and that the developer may bring to the table. And that's what you have here. It doesn't just happen from going from one land use to another and you're done. So the municipality, as I believe Robert has touched on, has a lot of control over a development like this. And we've worked within, tried to work within those controls all the way through. So just first of all, before I touch on 2 critical points that I'd like to refute or dispute that were brought up earlier, one by Robert and one by this gentleman here, which were very valid, but I'll tell you where we're coming from a legislative and professional perspective. First of all, this project started 4.5 years ago, approximately, with a lot of analysis. There's a map that Robert has that we started, sat down with Ian, and I believe it was in front of council in the last several years as well, that defined exactly what was going on that piece of land. Yes, it is in the floodplain, but it's fraught with all kinds of other issues, but at the same time lends itself to a development like we have proposed here. And that was, a lot of it was with regard to who owned what and where did that happen. So much of your right-of-ways go into the lake, they go into the river, and they're down very steep slopes. And that's when we started determining, in collaboration with our GIS people, our engineers and designers, that this land is only a certain area that has potential for development. And the only way something would progress here on behalf of Quality Developments, our client, quality property development. Our client was if in fact we can go through a consolidation with the municipality. And that at that time, it was agreed with Mr. Dunlop that it made sense to present an opportunity to consolidate that land. That's the only way anything would ever happen to that piece of land. And that's where we are right now, looking at the ability to consolidate all these lands. Otherwise, nothing is going to happen down there for a long time. There's no access down to the lake. There's no access along the river. It's very, very, very fraught with all kinds of problems for the developer, for the owner, and the municipality, and hence the public. So we dealt with that for quite a while. Then we came up with a very definitive GIS-based opportunities and constraints map. We sat down with Ian and said, here's what we've got. What can we do with this? Very quickly, and not after only discussions with the village, but a number of the approving authorities, being in the Ministry of Highways, Regional District, anybody that had anything to do with floodplain in that area in the past, on the river side and on the lake side, determined what could be done with that land. And very quickly, all the recommendations coming back, suggestions coming back, an insight was it would be something like a camping area, an RV park could work. However, you have to meet certain guidelines. We then were directed by the municipality to look at all the policies, including the recently completed OCP that the municipality had put together in 2022 and approved by the public, approved by the council of the day. I believe your worship is at the table at that one. And it was determined that at that point, as Mr. Dunlop said, it was recognized that an RV park would be an appropriate use and conceivable use for that area. However, there were so many different items, issues, or whatever that we had to overcome. So it was decided in collaboration with the municipality that we would move forward in trying to address all of those issues. Did it still make sense? And we did. We moved down that path and we formed a team of very, very specialized consultants to deal with every item and so forth. Or as we went along, as many of you heard when we went to the meeting in November, towards the end of November, where Mr. Dunlop presented as well, every time he would come back and say, what about, did you look at this? Did you look at that? Either we had looked at it or we would bring in another consultant to make sure we looked at it. Right up until the other day, we provided Robert with a finalized copy and supportive copy by the archaeologist that did the archaeological impact review. So just about everything that's been asked for over the last 4.5, 5 years has been provided, up until Robert the other day saying that there is an indication by council wanting to have the 15 meters waterfront, lakefront land dedicated to park. And that's something that we, as you know, we now have before council as a definite possibility in the land transaction. The dedication of the lands became an issue as well. One of the reasons why Mr. Unrau from QBT wanted to, there's that map, why we wanted to protect the integrity. Not only we knew that we had to protect the integrity of the environment on the lake and the river, we also knew that there was a responsibility to try to protect the integrity of what this commercial RV park was going to be, where you're going to have families, you're going to have trailers on there, you're going to have people camping on there, you're going to have activities there that may be incongruous with what could happen in the public area in that waterfront. And that was things that happened like now that happened there, people building their bonfires. I won't mention all the other things that we've seen on that waterfront in the 5 years that we've been working here, but it's to the point where Dale asked, Mr. Unrau asked, how do we separate that kind of activity in the public realm and the private realm if we can get this land consolidated? And we said, well, distance is one way to do it, if we got the distance. And that's why at a certain point there, we had 30 to 50 meters of distance that made a lot of sense. Municipality came back recently and said, no, we want to protect that for more public access along with the river. We understood that, we brought that back, and that's in front of council right now to see how that green line represents at least 15 meters from the lake edge, or the permanent boundary as it's called, surveyed back 15 meters to protect that area and dedicate that area to the municipality without any cost. In a lot of cases, that type of land is often paid for by the municipality to get it. But in this case here, it's being dedicated as land along the river as well, the 30-meter setback along the river. So in that regard, then, after there's been a lot of fine tuning of the plan, and as Robert very appropriately said, with the DP and all of the other mechanisms the municipality has to control the development here, that subdivision plan, that layout and so forth, the concept that was put forward for 70 to 80 sites can be fine-tuned as we get into subdivision, as we get into development permit. Now, I just want to touch on one of the points that was brought up because we're getting down to the more detail. Robert, you did mention that the RV park development is not permitted in that area. We've checked with our lawyer, and from what we know, and Marianne can tell you, of Ecoscape, when you have a DP like that, and you have right at the front of the waterfront development area that says RV parks are permitted, and there's a DP, an overriding DP area, like the lakefront protection area, and that's a dangerous word to use, lakefront protection area, you can still develop in there. However, because it says right in the guidelines and in your regulations, it says, if in fact you're doing any development there, you got to deal with roads, you got to deal with all of these different items, which we typically do every time we fine tune a DP with the municipality. So the development is permitted there, but it's going to be limited, it's going to be restricted. There's all kinds of things that we can do in design and engineering and so forth to make sure that the integrity of that waterfront is protected and that particular area is protected. So that's what has to be understood. The second point, Your Worship, through this gentleman here that mentioned he hadn't seen anything about a boat launch. The boat launch has always been in our plan from day one, and it was submitted and talked about at the very beginning and is in the rezoning application that's been sat before council and went to the public in November of last year. So it has been there. We recognize that the OCP does talk about non-motorized. That's understandable, and QPP is comfortable with that. But there's all these various federal and provincial regulations that any kind of development like that done by the municipality or the developer must abide by to allow that kind of facility to be put into that area. In engineering and location and so forth to make sure you're dealing with the environmental integrity of that foreshore. And Marianne can speak to that as well if necessary in a moment. And then just to finish off, Your Worship, we've gotten now from the rezoning application, we're going backwards in a way, but we recognize that the important thing is to make sure that that everybody's comfortable with the land transaction and disposition and what kind of money is going to be traded. And that's part of the agreement that Robert has been working on between us and our QPD and the municipality. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, but we've reached quite a comfort level in terms of what the municipality wants and what the developer is prepared to pay and transact to make sure that the land is consolidated so something viable can be done with that land. Because right now, nothing will happen unless there is that consolidation. With regard, again, back to the point about whether any development can happen on that site, as far as we understood, and Ian Dunlop was one of the principal authors of the OCP, his feeling was just like mine, that development can happen there, providing you do all these things that's stipulated in the guidelines of that development permit area. And that's where all of the instructions, directions, and what have you that are contained within the environmental impact report by Ecoscape, that is enshrined in that DP. And then if in fact the municipality wants to add other or more relative to all those guidelines and regulations that's put into that DP, that can work as well. And again, the line of where the RV sites go and what kind of sites they are, that can be tweaked at subdivision stage as well. Oh, and I just wanted to mention too that, and I think Robert brought this up as well, but there's been a lot of studies that were asked for and have been done. The municipality has also already done some peer reviews as well. And we know that all of this application has to go forward. The rezoning application has to go for referral to major ministries like highways or MOTI, environment, regional district, interior health. So at least those. And those are authorities that we've already talked to at the beginning. So we're quite certain they're going to be supportive, but they'll also say, but do this, 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 and that, which is very typical of putting one of these applications in front of the province and senior levels of government. And the last thing I just wanted to mention that the construction is a step-by-step thing, and the DP, as Robert mentioned, forms a very important part of that final approval. The development permits are they work in conjunction with zoning, they work in conjunction with development covenants, restrictive covenants, a number of different avenues or abilities that the municipality has to control the development, the type of development on that land. And a lot of those do call for certain kinds of step-by-step approaches as we're going through construction. For example, right in the environmental impact assessment, the ecoscape was very clear about making sure that there is an environmental reviewer on site, brought in every so many weeks, so many months during construction, so that they're making sure that anything that's endangered, anything that has to be protected from an environmental perspective on the water or on the land is noted by them. And that's the same with archaeological. The archaeological report is now in Robert's hands. Also said they have no objection with regard to environmental archaeological requirements on that site. However, they do need follow-up, which means that the contractor who's working on the site must have a report almost daily to make sure if anything comes up that smacks of a archaeological quality, it must be recorded and brought to the attention of the archaeologist, which goes right through to Victoria at the provincial level. So there's that, you have to understand, there's that step-by-step type of process that happens to allow something like this development occur. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that there is a push by the municipality and by Ian at the time to see whether we could integrate some residential. And you remember at the very beginning, we said the residential would be great and the higher elevation, not down in the floodplain because of the severe restrictions we have there that allows for RV park development, but not for permanent housing, not for permanent habitation. So we put some residential up top, but that is constrained by the fact that there's no dedicated or no sanitary sewer going to it. It would all be septic at this time. So we're limited by the amount of residential that can happen up there. Otherwise, some residential can definitely happen up top. So, Your Worship, that's just a little bit of background and just some feelings that we have about how some of the things can happen with good control and management that the municipality has at its disposal. And I don't know whether Mary Ann might be available and may want to add to anything I've said. Do we have that opportunity?
Very, very briefly, because we're in a little while.
Is Mary Ann available to add anything?
Yes, hello. I'm Marianne with Ecoscape Environmental. I just wanted to highlight our report, although as Ed stated that the boat launch was put forth from the beginning, our environmental assessment did not account for that boat launch. The scope of the boat launch was not included. Our scope was only for the RV park and the septic and clearing that would have to happen to facilitate that RV park. But because this land is within the lakefront development permit area, it did trigger a requirement for an environmental assessment. And so we did do a site assessment out there in the winter of 2022. And we were able to designate the different areas for environmental sensitivity. And we had very high rated areas along the Kaslo River and high rated areas along the lakeshore. And the flatter portion of cleared area from previous industrial uses was rated as moderate. And so we do have quite an extensive recommendation section in this report, including a big restoration area that which would be along the lakefront. And that is really to offset any losses of high value habitat from that, the build out of the RV park. And so I just want to highlight that that area along the lake, it's really intended, that 15-meter setback is intended for restoration and naturalization of that area. And so there's about 2,000 shrubs that are, prescribed for that area to offset any losses on the upper area, as well as a couple hundred trees as well. So just want to highlight that, although, it's great to have the public access, the real intent is for restoration along that shoreline.
Thank you, Marianne. A couple of things that I wanted to mention right off the bat is, yes, the boat launch was in the plan, but this is the first time it's been noted as a condition of allowing, giving the 15 meters to the village. So that is a new element that has been added. And Councillors Bird and Brown were just elected, 2 years ago, so they have not been privy to, all the materials were there, but there was a lot of discussion that was happening at the staff level in the early days while we were developing the proposal to see what was working. And it came to council when there was an official proposal for us to deal with. So council was not involved with every step of the way in those first couple of years. So are there any questions by council? A few questions. So Councillor Chair.
So you indicated that your consultants and had looked at the DP area and the lawyer, but had they looked at the definition of passive recreation? Because that seems to be what it's driving, what can and can't be in that area. And so passive recreation, according to the OCP, are like walking trails and those non-motorized things. So how does that relate to an RV park?
Right, well, one is, it's a matter of where you're putting these different things and how you're building them as well. So how far do you want to go into the definition of passive? I think there's also one of the problems with the plan is it's incongruous, where in the DP guidelines, it tells you you can do all this stuff providing you meet all these guidelines. And then at the front end, it says, and then it says passive, but then at the front end, it says you can put a camping and an RV park here. So when we talked to Ian, he said, as far as he was concerned, if in fact a DP guidelines were addressed, you can do a lot of that kind of development in that area. So it's a question of remembering that an RV, it sits on a gravel pad. So that's camping, and in a passive way. You can put a tent on there. That's passive as well. So how do you define passive? That's the difficult part. And a lot of it comes back to, what are you really trying to do with that DP? You're trying to protect the environmental integrity. In a DP, when you're finalizing with the municipality, the biologist comes in again and looks at that DP and says, here's what we can do. If the municipality really wants this to happen, here's what we can do to make sure that fits. And that all kinds of things that come to mind are the type of roadway, no asphalt. It's just hard packed, crushed, whatever, surface. Certain kind of planting. No, like somebody from the public sent me a letter that the other day that said we want to do a big ball diamond and a grass area. And I'm going, like, the amount of fertilizer and the amount of herbicides and what have you that would go into something like that would be very dangerous compared to what we're doing here. The area that's going to be preserved for where the common area, amenity area is in the middle, that doesn't have to be lawn or grass or whatever. It becomes xeriscape, so it's naturalized. There's all kinds of different things that you can do to protect the area, to protect that area. That's what they mean by protection. As far as the conversation I had with Mr. Dunlop a couple of years ago. So that is if the municipality wants to entertain that kind of development, or otherwise you're moving the actual subdivision around to make it fit around that area.
And if you could direct your responses to the chair.
I'm sorry.
Councilor Brown.
Thank you, through the chair. So my understanding that this was to be solely RVs. When we met with Dale at the property, I specifically queried about camping, and I was told that that would not be something that would be included. It would just be RVs. And I was also told at the time they weren't considering a strata and or solely a strata, and then now it is solely a strata. So could you please give me a definitive answer as to, when you speak about people camping there, do you mean in tents and or are you specifically referring to RVs solely?
That's a very good question, and just Robert and I were just addressing that. Robert?
Chair.
I'm sorry, the chair, through the chair to Robert. We're just addressing that point in writing with regard to what could go into the zoning bylaw. We provided a zoning bylaw rough draft to Ian when we started this process and before it went to the public in November. And in that we had seasonal camping and we had RV camping, but tent camping would be permitted. And strata was always talked about. It's not new. That's what we wanted, and that's what Dale was promoting right from day one. So that was put into the bylaw that was presented at the beginning, the strata lots. So he's continued to come back to us and say, I want a strata development. It doesn't preclude, it's in the definition of the zoning, and you can change the definition in the zoning of what that camping means, Your Worship. So, but your point is respected. In the zoning bylaw that's put forward that goes to rezoning after this land transfer is negotiated or settled on, that there has to be an agreement between the municipality and the developer as to what does that want to be. And it's put into, in a zoning bylaw, you put into you got permitted uses, ancillary uses, auxiliary uses, and so forth. And in most cases when we started this, and Dale indicated we wanted to look at an RV park stratified, we started looking at several, and we're working on ones that are in the Okanagan right now. What is the definition? Well, how are they defining them in their bylaws and so forth? And they all vary. So it's really up to the business model that's going to work here and what the municipality will accept. The other issue that Robert brought up, Your Worship, is storage or no storage. Temporary storage, not temporary storage. It becomes a big issue in a development like this.
Chair, I'm just curious as to with your First Nations consultation with whom to speak.
Sorry, who did we?
With respect to the First Nations consultation.
It's all in the report. The report was done by Ursus Archaeological. It's one of the leading archaeological consulting firms in the BC interior, and I believe the person who is responsible for a lot of the groundwork is resident right here in Kaslo, and then reviewed by the manager of Ursus in the Okanagan in Vernon, where they're headquartered, and they have offices all over BC. And they had they're obligated to contact, I think there's 4 or 5 First Nations communities that have interest in the shore along Kootenai Lake. And every one of them was contacted to come out on the onsite with lots of notice. Supposedly in the report, Oysters indicates one showed up. He talked to another one or two, and the other one said they just weren't busy or they weren't really that interested. They know about it, and that was it. In the report and in writing to me in my email, and I can share that with Robert, they have said if there's any pushback or any question from the village of Kaslo, Your Worship, that they would be prepared to stand behind the report and come back to you with any clarification you need. So I've given it to Robert for a preliminary review. Any questions through the chair, through you, by all means, let us know. Yeah. Otherwise, we've used them a lot. They've been involved in some of the biggest projects like this in BC with us, and they're respected in Victoria with the Archaeology Heritage Branch.
All right. Any other questions for council before I go to public questions? All right. So I'd now like to start the public question period. Please remember to speak only when called upon. Address your question to the chair with minimal preamble and begin by stating your name and community of residence for the record. You will have no more than 1 minute, and if you are still speaking when the timer beeps after 50 seconds, please wrap it up. And that's including online.
No, the online, I'm just starting to see some pieces up. I think I've only got one hand online, so maybe just a reminder to folks online. I've got two now, but one doesn't have a name. So if there's no name, I can't call upon them to put them on the list.
All right. So our first question will be from Anne Malik. Anne.
Your Worship and Council.
So maybe I'll just check. Can everybody hear online hear Anne where she's standing right now? I want to make sure that you can hear questions. I'm going to take that down the picture and then I can see everybody. Yes. So if I could get a thumbs up from anybody that they could hear Anne. Okay, perfect. Go ahead, Anne.
Bylaw, Anne Malik, resident of Kaslo. Bylaw 1298, which has been read a first time, is titled An Amendment Bylaw for Commercial Recreation RV Camping. There is a map in the agenda packet that was just up there. And it suggests that this area on the map rezone area 1 from M1 industrial to CR camping. This suggests to me that there is something new or something different. And my question is council prepared to notify the developer that zoning amendment bylaw 1298 for commercial recreation RV camping will die and a new zoning amendment bylaw for CR camping will be required? Thank you.
I can offer general comments, which is that the bylaw is the first reading at this point, so the bylaw doesn't have to necessarily be replaced. It can be amended and can have different designations in it, and changes to the bylaw can be made until third reading, at which point no further changes to the bylaw can be made unless council chooses to rescind third reading and give third reading to revise bylaw.
Hurst.
Thank you, Your Worship, the mayor and council and fellow citizens and neighbors of interest. This is not the same as what Anne asked you, but it is also a call for housekeeping and critical scrutiny. We have here a land use problem, basically. And we've kind of going about it in a backwards way, but that's okay. We need good maps. The maps have to be consistent, accurate, and have to have scales. We have seen bad maps already today. And if you don't know that, you haven't been following the maps. And we also need clear following of the OCP. The OCP is the master document. It is binding for the town. It is a wonderful thing, and it should be followed. My question is, does the council collectively and individually affirm that they will work with accurate maps, accurate information, critical thinking, and use the OCP in spirit and in letter? Thank you.
Staff is ensuring that we are following the OCP. And as far as mapping, I'm not a map person, so I don't know what there will be. Will there be any updated mapping provided with more detail than what we've gotten? Because these have just been guidance at this point. It's not, is it not not the official mapping that will be utilized, or?
Mayor, do it. So there's I believe one of the conditions of the proposed purchase and sale agreement would be a survey, and calculations would be based on the survey. And that said, if council requires a certain map, accurate map, in order to make a decision, then provide direction to staff, provide detail, something specific you're looking for.
Jim Holland.
In the current OCP, there's no provision for strata title RV parks, which are significant, complex, high impact land use designations. So why is the village considering bylaw 1298 when it specifies permitted uses that are not identified by the OCP? Just because a factor that affects the community and land planning is not in the OCP is not a carte blanche to go ahead and move forward on that. It's the opposite. It shouldn't be considered until the OCP addresses that issue.
Bill Wells. And I didn't give response because there wasn't a question in there. That was a statement, in my view. So, Bill.
Mayor, I'm Bill Wells from Kaslo. I've been studying this valley and the land around the lake since the 1980s in a professional capacity. There is an ongoing flood hazard in Kaslo. Much of Kaslo is on an alluvial fan, which was built by repeated flooding. There will be more flooding events. Water and gravity will prevail, no matter how strong the engineering. Large flooding events can occur from both the river and the lake, and have. The frequency of these events will continue to be unpredictable, but they are measurably more frequent than in times past. Changes in the larger climate are causing weirdness in the behavior of weather. These natural flood hazards created by this create risks for development. I think they are better left undeveloped. The developer's own consultant notes the flood recurrent cycle in this river is 1 in 200 years. The last big one here was 130 years ago. In 2012, there was a landslide in Johnson's Landing that killed 4 people, displaced others. It was a once in a 1,000-year event. Up to 5 times normal rainfall fell in. In 2013, another once in a 1,000-year storm caused a course-changing flooding in Fly Creek and surges in the Kaslo River. Again, the rain was many times normal. Those 2 once in a 1,000-year events occurred in 2 consecutive years.
You have it, sorry, but we're over time. Do you have a question, Bill?
Yes. Are you worried about flood hazard in this area, in this development? I am.
I've got to address there was a question. The first thing I read was a question.
Okay.
And so for the mayor to point out that I didn't have a question is incorrect.
Okay, I'm sorry, Jim. So if you could repeat that question and then I will go to Bill.
There's no provision in the OCP for stratified RV parks, which are significant, complex, high-impact land use designations. So why is the village considering bylaw 1298 when this specifies permitted uses that are not identified in the OCP?
Thank you, Mayor Hewitt. Let's put us back to this discussion of the definition of passive recreational use. And suppose at the end of the day, one of the duties of council is to interpret the OCP and decide whether this proposed RV park is in line with the OCP. So notwithstanding zoning and all these other items, is it aligned with what the intent of the OCP is? And so specific to passive recreational use, I think council would have to consider what does that mean? There's examples given in the OCP of trails and I think a bench is in there and non-motorized boat launch, but perhaps further thought could be put into what does council believe the OCP means by passive recreational use. And further to that, if directions provided to staff, we could go away and gather more information from even a legal perspective to help inform your decision.
How about you?
And
this requires
so to address the question of Mr. Wells, yes, we would be concerned about flooding, and I believe, and I'll let the CAO do some follow-up, but that is the purpose of some of the studies that are being done to make sure that it is safe for development. Would you consider that to be accurate?
Thank you, Mayor Hewitt. You're always very accurate. I believe in the summary I provided earlier in this meeting, there was a comment that it was something related to flood mitigation, that an assessment had been performed. And there's some work that has occurred recently on the Kaslo River, including work to help protect the subject lands. There's further work that would be required, and I believe the works would occur on the property line along the river between the riparian setback and the RV park property. And I would not be able to comment directly about 1,000-year events. And I do not recall the specific terms that were looked at for respect to flood mitigation. Thank you.
Right, and then I will go online. I know there are more speakers in the room, but the people online didn't have the same opportunity to log in and put their names on the list as early as people in person. So I will go to Tamara. Are you still online, Tamara?
Here, sorry, I just lost my screen for a moment there. Thank you for taking my question. Okay, so section 3.10 of the OCP states that Kaslo recognizes the importance of addressing the impacts of a changing climate on local environment, infrastructure, economy, and the community, including by lowering emissions of climate pollutants from local sources. So this gives rise to a two-part question. First, how does Council reconcile our commitment to reducing climate impacts with approving a new development that will involve a massive increase in traffic of very heavy vehicles that consume extreme amounts of fossil fuels and emit extreme amounts of climate pollution? And secondly, how do you address the economic unreliability of basing Kaslo's economic growth plan on large-scale investment in road-based tourism involving heavy vehicles at a time when the climate crisis is making a decrease in fossil fuel consumption both necessary and inevitable?
Yeah, well, that's a difficult one to answer, but it's something that we do have to consider, but we also have to consider proposals that are put before us and give them due consideration. There are many things that do affect our climate, and we can't say no to everything.
But you have an alternate proposal on the table from the South Beach Working Group that does not have those impacts. So how is it meaningful to even include this in the OCP if it's not considered when you're looking at specific development proposals?
We have not received a specific proposal from the South Beach Working Group. They were invited to be a delegation this evening, but subsequent to a meeting with the CAO today, and we're not able to put together their presentation in time for tonight's meeting. But it was entertained. So, did you have anything to add? Okay. All right, so I'll take another online question from Michael Jones. So,
Thank you very much. Michael Jones, resident of Kaslo. Thanks for inviting my question. My question is to the chair, the mayor, and the council, and I'll make it brief and simple. It is, will the village refer to a local government referendum? I say that because the issue is controversial, requires zoning and bylaw changes, which are significant, and requires significant environmental considerations, and there are potential very long-term impacts. As you may already know, referendums are used extensively by local governments in Europe, they're starting to be used, and have been used as recently as April 2023 by the RDCK. I think a local referendum would solve a lot of issues here, and I for one would be willing to go with however it ended up going, pro or against, either way, I would support
it. I know you have directed that towards myself and council, but our corporate officer is more conversant in the rules surrounding that type of thing. So I will.
My apologies. I thought I incorporated the CAO when I said the chair.
Oh, sorry. But our corporate officer deals with those types of matters.
Okay, then I'll direct the question to him. Would you?
Yeah, corporate officer Alloway, Catherine.
Okay, my apologies.
Yep.
Will you refer this to a local government referendum?
So I would say a referendum is not required in this particular case. If council wishes to hold a referendum, that's something that should be direction to staff, and we'll come back with some pricing options for you, because a referendum is a complex process, and there's a lot of, it has significant costs associated with delivering a referendum.
Can I respond to that?
Just one supplemental, and if you could make it quickly, please.
I will make it very quickly. I know it's not required, but because this is so controversial, because it requires significant zoning and bylaw changes, and because the environmental considerations are significant and long-term, it would seem to me prudent that something similar to a government or a local government referendum may be in order.
I think I'll make further comment. There are, like, as you stated, there are many concerns in there, and they all have their own separate approval processes. What we're being asked to decide on right now is just one of the steps in a multi-step process. So there will be additional public consultation at each phase, and it's when is the appropriate time to, if we decided that referendum was something that we wanted to do, there are all those other steps that do have to happen as well. So it wouldn't stop those processes. It would be in addition, would be, yes.
Yeah, you would have to decide at what point and what your referendum question was going to come through.
Okay, one more online and then I'll go back to the room. And how much time did we have left? We have extended the question period by 15 minutes already. And I'm not sure where we're at.
We've got about 10 minutes left.
We've got 10 minutes left. So just a warning that to please keep your preamble to a minimum so we can get through more questions. Lorraine. Oh, you're on mute, Lorraine.
Still muted.
No.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just keep my finger on the space button. Through you, Madam Mayor and the council, thank you for letting me speak. I would just like to reiterate two things. One, I had much of the same sort of thing that Bill Wells was talking about in terms of floodplains and the importance of the impact of climate change on the floodplain now expected flooding. And I would just think about the highest, best use for this land. And that it would seem to me very prudent that the highest best use of this land may be a buffer for Kaslo. Because when you look at the flooding that's going on every year, more and more flooding in more and more towns and cities. We've got Abbotsford, Grand Forks, Princeton, many other places that have had massive floods, and they're still waiting to get back into their homes, and is loss of life, rarely, but luckily, but still to be considered. So I would wonder if the village is considering the precautionary principle in a situation like this, where if you have definite risk, higher risk than usual, and it's growing and growing with climate change, that we should be taking a precautionary principle and looking at this land as something we can do some really imaginative things with it, and more than just putting some RVs on it, not to put down anything like that, but I'm just saying we could do a lot with this land that will also be a buffer for the village.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Susan, you're muted to the computer crow.
Can you hear us online?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
All right. So I'll say it again. So we've already answered a question regarding flooding and climate change. So I'm going to go on to the next question, and a reminder to those who are asking questions to ask new questions that have not been addressed before. So I'll go back to the room. Don Scarlett.
Thank you, Your Worship. We had a map shown on the screen recently that was provided by CT Developments. And it showed one complete area with no indication of where the boundary of the Lakeshore Protection Development Permit area is. And the CAO has advised council that the developer's proposed development within the Lakeshore Protection Development Permit area is not allowed. We need to see a map that shows that line where the and that line, by the way, was the one that was described earlier in our meeting. It was called, well, it was actually the map that was shown with yellow cross lines on it. That's the best way to remember it. And without that being shown, we have no way of knowing that, in fact, the proposal by the the developments can not occur in more than 2/3 of the area shown on that map. So my question is really just, can we get that map shown and circulated to everybody? Because once you see that, you realize that the trailer park can't even be put in about 2/3 of the area on that map.
Right. I think that's an easy request, that we can have that map put into the folder online. Is there a map that exists? Will that be?
Mayor Hewitt, to my knowledge, there's not a map that specifically has that available. I mean, all the maps we have available are been put on the website already, and I don't recall that being one of them.
If corporate officer Alley put a note for consideration by council. Okay, I will take two more questions, one more in the room and one more online. So we have Russell Precious next.
Russell Precious, Kaslo, Mayor Hewitt, councillors. Lorraine kind of hijacked my question, which was to emphasize that it's not a bad idea to invoke the precautionary principle, which doctors know that as a Hippocratic oath, first do no harm. My question, would council please consider delaying any decisions on Southeast development until they have received a proper delegation from the Southeast Working Group at a committee of the whole meeting?
All right, well, we'll take that under consideration. As I stated, we were willing to entertain that, so council will consider that. And then online, how are we doing for time? Can I take more than one?
You can probably have a couple more.
Okay,
Yeah.
All right, so Laura Douglas, online.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my question. Mayor and Council, I live in Kaslo, BC. So my question is about the environmental study. There was, in that study, it said detailed wildlife surveys and comprehensive vegetation surveys were not conducted as part of this assessment, as they were not within the scope of a typical IEA. Consequently, the presence and absence of rare or endangered plant species, species at risk, critical habitat were not confirmed. Additional surveys conducted over multiple seasons may be required, depending on the nature of the study area and proposed development. Will the council be asking for additional studies to be done over multiple seasons, as the study was done during February, when much of the area was covered in snow and seasonal birds would not have been present?
Mayor Hewitt, the environmental impact assessment was performed because in the future, at the time of the application through the development permit area process, the environmental impact assessment would be relevant. At this point, it hasn't been relevant because the topic of land transfer purchase and sale agreement does not include the development permit process. That would happen after the purchase and agreement would have been concluded. At the time of an application for a development permit, absolutely, there would be more scrutiny put on the environmental impact assessment, and any recommendations of that report would be considered.
Thank you.
Go to Jesse Spears.
Thank you, Mayor Hewitt, Council. My name is Jessie Spears. I live in Upper Kaslo. The BC Rural Centre is an excellent organization whose specific mandate is to help rural BC communities like ours succeed. The executive director of the BC Rural Centre has studied this specific South Beach situation and recently shared with the South Beach Working Group, and I quote, "Other rural communities that are seasonally tourist-focused regret the transition and miss the community-mindedness that was lost when the municipality didn't listen to the voices and concerns of the residents." End quote. I appreciate that you're considering further public input for the CAO tonight. My question is, given this excellent resource, will council or staff commit to contacting the BC Rural Centre to obtain useful experience-based information before finalizing this decision?
So, usually there. Okay, well, you will be speaking your own opinion, and yeah, I'll let you speak.
I'm wondering if I can make a motion to extend the question period to allow for more people who have questions to be able to share their questions.
So that motion has to be unanimous, does it?
Yes, I believe so.
I would put it forth for a seconder.
Second for discussion.
Yeah, second for discussion, Councilor.
The discussion being how much longer?
To the chair, I would suggest to put a time limit on it. I would say an additional 10 minutes.
Extend it by another 10 minutes to so I'll put that to a vote. It has to be unanimous. All those in favor? Okay, motion is carried. And regarding Jesse's request, yeah, that's not a resource that we would normally use. And actually, could you just note that for council to consider, because we're not making decisions right now on the things that you're asking us. I can answer questions, but when you're asking us to take actions, that has to be at the will of council. So they will be taken under consideration. So we'll go back online and we have Amy Watson. And just so people know, we won't be taking any additional speakers beyond what I've got on the list, because I've still got another 7. And I think that will take us our 10 minutes. So, Amy, are you still online? So then we'll go to Kevin Flaherty.
Kevin, you're muted.
It's probably a good thing I'm muted.
Yeah.
My voice is gone. Kevin Flaherty from Lower Kaslo. Most of my questions have been asked, but I wanted to talk The proponents have put forward a proposal that has nothing to do with addressing affordable housing needs in our community. It has lots of questions about environmental and other uses, problems with the use of it. But I've also got concerns about there's been no evidence showing what the economic value to this community might be other than vague promises of the tourism, adding to our tourism economy / burden, depending on who you're talking to. Other than the fact there's been village money put into protecting the proposed development along the river. I've heard nothing about except the I'd like, I guess, more detail from the CAO and others about costs associated with or any revenue associated with potential taxation. The only thing I've read is that there would be possible net loss of taxation revenue in one classification if this goes ahead. Anyway, I think there's also the dollars and cents about that aren't being very transparent about what revenue might be lost if we don't apply proper charges for water hookups for all these 70 or 80 units, and also the concerns around other costs related to this, roadways and things like that. Policing.
Thanks, Kevin. You've got a couple of questions there.
That was my question, I guess, is can someone quantify the benefits financial benefits to the village of Kaslo?
There you go. The speaker's correct. Once information to date is anecdotal, an economic impact assessment hasn't been performed. So I don't think there's anything specific to comment.
We'll try to go back to you, Amy. There we go.
Hi there. You caught me eating a chip. Sorry. I had two questions. The first one was, I think Robert answered this, but I noted the environmental assessment consultant indicated that their assessment currently does not include the boat launch. And so my query would have been, so that must need a new DP application, development permit application, or you'll need an updated assessment. And it would also then have to include a parking area and a road to access said boat launch, I assume. So my first question is that a correct assumption? You would need a new development permit, or sorry, environmental assessment to meet the development permit requirements?
Staff haven't put considerable time into thinking about the development permit process because it would occur after the purchase and sale agreement has been completed. Possible that further environmental assessment would be required.
Okay, and if you can quickly ask your second question.
Yes, the second one was there was a different understanding on the ability to have an RV park in the current DP area from yourself, Robert, through the chair, to your CAO, and I believe the planner for the proposal. So how will you reconcile that? Obviously, the village's interpretation would be the correct one, I assume.
You have to repeat the question.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Just the difference between the allowability of the RV park in the DP area, where is our opinion in your report different from that of the developer. Did I restate that correctly? Okay.
Got it.
Thank you, Mayor Hewitt. I'd say it's if council would like further clarification, then direction needs to be provided to staff to do more work and come back and report.
Dr. Alley. All right, so we'll go back to the room. Shauna.
Thank you, Council. My name's Shauna Budik. I'm from Kaslo. My question was asked earlier. Trying to remember his last name, Jones, thank you. Just about, clearly this is a very controversial topic. I would just think that it's probably a good idea to pull back the reins on this a little bit and ask council to consider a referendum on this. And would the councillors and the mayor consider taking this to a referendum, because there's lots of controversy on this. That was my same question as Mike's.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll go back online. Randy Morse.
Thank you, Mayor. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Randy Morse. I live a brisk 6-minute walk from South Beach in Lower Kaslo. My question revolves around something that Robert said in his statement. I believe it was in November of 23 at the Legion, a public information session was held. As I recall, fewer than 50 people showed up for that. And if I recall correctly, there were 16 written comments that came out of the meeting, something like that. I think it was like 13 were in favor of this development going forward, 3 were not. Fast forward just over a year, I just put 2 posts and podcasts on the Kaslo Facebook page, which is the de facto news organ for our community, right? I've never seen such an outpouring of commentary in all of my years, 20 of them, living in Kaslo. Hundreds of comments, thoughtful, really interesting comments on both sides of the equation. I did a quick check at 1 o'clock this afternoon, and of the over 100 actual written comments, over and above no way, no, you've got to be kidding, as to whether or not people were in favor of this, 97% were opposed. So my question is whether or not council is prepared to act on either the second option that Robert mentioned coming out of this meeting, that is, sorry, QP Developments, the deal is off, or number 3, putting the matter in abeyance, certainly hosting an information session with the working group and gathering more input from the public before making a decision of this magnitude. Thank you.
That's council's task ahead of us in the business portion of the meeting. Okay, our last question in the room is Steve Bay.
Mayor Hewitt, the chair. My question is, why are DPA regulations not being applied or acknowledged in land transaction negotiations prior, so that land use is determined prior to commitments being made for land transfers, particularly in the case of village-owned property?
Mayor Hewitt, the reason that the development permit application is not part of the purchase and sale agreement is probably more to do with the conditions for the developer more than the village. The village hasn't seen, or doesn't have, at this point, hasn't come across an interest in making sure the development permit would be successful, whereas that would typically be something the developer would have an invested interest in. So if the developer had said to the village, we want to hash out everything to do with the development permit as a condition of this purchase and sale agreement, well, then you would likely see it in the agreement. The village knows that it has control at the development permit stage, and so it doesn't necessarily need it within the purchase and sale agreement.
All right, and our last question online is from Andy Shadrack.
Thank you. I'm a resident of Kaslo for the last 37 years. And my question is a very simple one. Given that you're about to engage in a possible land transfer between the village and the developer, what I want to know is whether any analysis has been done of the soil contamination on this site, given that it's a very old industrial site. It seems to me that soil contamination analysis needs to take place before both sides decide to swap land. Thank you very much.
conditions that the village would have within the purchase and sale agreement would be that the Environmental Management Act, contaminated sites regulation, be considered and complied with by the developer.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our question period for this evening, and thank you for remaining respectful and asking your questions of council. And so at this point, we will move into the business portion of our meeting. So I will remind those in attendance that it's a council meeting. It isn't, you know, we've extended the question period. We could have taken it a lot longer, but we do have business to conduct tonight, and it's not just the South Beach item that we're discussing, and there is consideration of future public engagement. So it doesn't all have to happen tonight. Barry, one last question, if you can be concise.
Procedure.
Yes.
Thank you for allowing irregular intervention. The developer took 3 times the allotted time for his presentation and related questions, or more than 3. And we were allotted half an hour, but frankly, there's a lot more of us. And the developers had access to you before. And I think that we have a very good cause to ask for a lot more time. When you were discussing this matter, 1 or 2 councils meetings ago, you specifically talked about public giving their opinion about the South Beach development, not about a land swap. That's a cheap out. You said we're going to discuss the South Beach thing, and that's what we're here for.
Well, this is a special council meeting regarding one item. And like I said, this is probably not the last engagement we will have. And the next one will probably be more informal than this. This is a formal council meeting that we're in right now. It's not a public information session, not an open house. So we do have to have some restrictions on it.
The intent of the motion.
Yeah. All right. So we will now move into the business portion. Oh, okay. So we will actually take a slight recess because we're just about 2 hours into the meeting. So
can I ask a question? Can you go into the business portion of the meeting and the discussion on this?
Okay, so we'll reconvene the meeting, and to have the opportunity for a little more informal discussion with council, we'll have a motion to go into committee of the whole. If agreeable, moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Leithwood. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion is carried. Okay, so the first item we'll be discussing is the purchase and sale agreement between Village of Kaslo and QP Developments. So did you want to speak any more on that, CEO Baker?
Thank you, Mayor Hewitt. Perhaps just a couple of comments. One would be if there's more information that council would like from staff, perhaps specific to the development permit process, and you know, and wants to consider that as part of the purchase and sale agreement, then direction can be provided, more information can be brought back. Council feels like more input from the public is needed and wants more specific information on its options, public information session and hearings and all this above and beyond what's already been provided in the staff report, then please feel free to provide direction. And finally, I think that's it.
So maybe what I'll start with is, there was a few items that we asked the corporate officer to note. Can you, please refresh our memories as to what they are?
We had 3 separate requests. The first was from Donna Scarlett, who had questions about some maps. Then we had a question from Jesse Spears about involving the BC Rural Center. And then we had a question from Amy Watson about the interpretation of BP rules.
So are there any of those items that council would like to, since we're in committee of the whole, we have to make a recommendation to council. We can't actually make motions in committee of the whole. We can make recommendations to council. So are there any items that council members would like to recommend? So I'll Councillor Brown first.
Through the chair, I would like to recommend more clarity around the specifics around the DPA, that we're getting contradictory information so that we have a clear understanding when we are making this very important vote as to the intention. At this point, the OCP is a guiding document that we're being asked to define by passing or not passing this. And I would like to be able to understand, as somebody who was not part of the OCP process, what the intention of the OCP and the very specific areas that state that do not include a RV park, while there's other areas that do include an RV park. And so I would really appreciate clarity around that specific point of the DPA, because were we to not have clarity, I recognize that that's off in the future and that doesn't necessarily pertain to the sale agreement. But I do think that it is important to understand if what is being proposed would be allowable, because that is pertinent information when we're making a decision as to whether to sell or not.
Corporate officer, I will go to you because there was a lot contained in what Councillor Brown just asked, whether it's advisable to have Councillor Brown write exactly what it is he would like, because in the procedures bylaw, we are to have that information written so that what we're voting on is exactly what you are intending. So I don't know whether you want to, while we're going to Councillor Leafwood's question, if we're able to write it down and we'll go from there.
I can read back what I've captured and see whether that's appropriate. Okay. So this is just a draft recommendation at this point, not something that's been approved by council, but that staff be directed to obtain clarity regarding the interpretation of the DPA requirements and where an RV park is permitted. Tell me what I'm missing.
Through the chair, I would just say if an RV park is permitted within the hatch marked DPA area.
I want to try and use precise language, so I'm just flipping back to the map to, so in the waterfront protection DPA, which is the strike.
Lakeshore.
Lakeshore protection DPA. Okay.
So,
Great fun.
Thank you, ma'am.
So maybe what I'm going to suggest is you make note of that, because I can see where this is going. We're not going to make a motion on this tonight. So what I will do is take all the questions and because there are things that council the information council wishes to have before making a decision. So we'll just make note of all the items and that the recommendation be that these items be addressed and brought back to a future council meeting, because it sounds like it's leading to that there's not enough information to make a decision tonight, but I could be wrong. So Councillor Leawood, I had you next.
I think we need more clarity around in the purchase and sale agreement of both lots. Because that, as we said, was not, the environmental assessment didn't include that, and there seems to be some misunderstandings around that. I think it would be good to have mapping, as Mr. Scarlett says, that does show how far into the DPA area the RV park would be. And I think it would be a good exercise to, one, inform the public how referendums work. Because there are several things that, as we've said, there are several steps to this process. What we were maybe going to pass tonight was one step, but there are still several steps, even till we get to the DPA. And people are asking for a referendum, but we can't have a referendum on each question in each step. We go broke as a village. So, you know, explaining how referendums work, there's typically one question that we answer yes or no. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Right. So explaining how that process works. And I think also an understanding of each step. So now possibly we're at the possible sale and purchase. Then what would be the next step? What would be the next step? Like we're still several steps away from actually approving a subdivision or development. Which I think some of the people are a little bit confused about. The process and all the steps we have to follow.
So I'll take all the input and then we'll have the corporate officer read back and make sure that we've captured everything. Councillor Bird?
Thank you through the chair. So I feel it's vitally important that we can maintain public access or create public access, legal access to the beach and have a nice wide swath along the river. And to me, that is like a primary concern is that we maintain public access to the river mouth on that side and to the beach. And I note that since the OCP in 2007, that was at the time the requirement put into the 2007 OCP was for 7 meters. And I know we're trying to get more than that. And that's what's in the purchase and sale agreement is a 30-meter strip. So that is one option that this purchase and sale option that I like is that it guarantees legal access for the public to the beach. And it has a good wide swath along the river. I like that. But it's obviously not the only option. What I'm seeing here, and what I actually didn't get to hear, was an alternate proposal whereby the public would still have access to the lakeshore. And that would be the South Beach Working Group's proposal. Before I make a decision on one way to guarantee public access to the beach, I would like to hear another option. And if we could invite them to be a delegation at some point, then I feel like as long as that other option is in the air and there's a significant number of people that are involved in thinking about that, I would like to hear it.
Councillor Vietnam.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the calendar here, and the next council meeting, by my calculation, is January 14th, which is almost a month from now. So I'm just thinking that the first item on the agenda here, there's no harm in passing it because it is only a recommendation, and that gives staff ample time to address some of the concerns that have been raised around the table. Or at least I would hope it would give them time to address it. But so I don't see the harm in making that recommendation, because that's all it is. And it's not going to appear on the agenda till the 14th of January. So gives everybody lots of time to get their ducks in a row.
Right. So,
the first one was from Council Brown that Zappy directed to obtain clarity regarding the interpretation of DPA requirements and whether an RV park is permitted within the area of the lakefront protection DPA. I think that one is correct. And then the second, that staff be directed to obtain a map showing how far into the DPA area the RV park will be. I think those are really the same thing stated two different ways. So I'm just going to go with the first one because I just put it was a little bit clearer. I've got that staff be directed to obtain additional information about including a boat launch in the proposal as a sort of standalone item. I have got that staff be directed to create an outline of the steps to follow, and that one was from Councillor Leafwood, and I would appreciate a little bit more discussion around that, so that what staff is preparing is actually what council is wanting. So maybe we can have a bit of clarification on that. But hang for 1 second. The last one is that staff be directed to invite the South Beach Working Group to appear as a delegation to council. So that, I think that last one is accurate, but I am still looking for outline of steps to follow. If we could, if staff would benefit from some additional discussion from council about what exactly that would look like.
Councillor Leafwood, did you have anything specific you were looking for?
Well, through the chair, like there's all these stages to this development. So currently, right now, one the stage is the sale and purchase of the land. So depending on where that goes, what is the next stage? Then what's the stage after that? And I know that stages do depend on how the votes go, but it's really hard to say right now, like if we're being asked to vote yes or no on this, because we're not there yet. We still have all of these steps that we need to follow. And so, like just an example of, you know, and you talked about Russian doll. So we've got this thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. So how do we inform the public of that? So they understand that if we sit here and make a decision about this right here, right now, that doesn't mean the development's going to go through. It's just one step in the process.
Yeah, so can I read that?
Yes.
So that staff be directed to create an outline of steps to follow and how the purchase and sale agreement fits into the process. I think that was kind of
basic, yeah.
I don't think at what point, like if there is it if there's one part of it is not successful, does that mean that ends the process? I think that's, so there's no sense investing time in subsequent processes if at one stage, if we say no, then that essentially there's no further work to do. I think that's important to note.
I'm just trying to find appropriate language, so kind of clarity on.
Questions?
Yes. Please.
Mayor, so I'll give you a little bit of info on the steps, and then maybe that'll help. You can tell us what more info do you need on certain steps. So the process is land disposition, step one. That's where we're at. Council interested in disposing of the land. Step two, then, well, if you are, then within the conditions, we would end up consolidating lots and rezoning, subdividing. And once everything's closed and completed, we can move into the development permitting process. Within each of those steps and conditions, there's some public input that would occur, referral to ministries, and et cetera, et cetera. So what steps do you need broken down further? What more information is needed about each of those steps? So it's land disposition and consolidation of lots, then subdivision, and then development and permitting would be the four major steps.
Did you have a question? I don't necessarily see this as information I need because I understand what the steps are. I believe it's information the public needs to understand. what the steps are, what are the limitations in each step, and, you know, like we're talking about the DPA. So when we get to that point, like even right now, we're talking about inland and sale, thinking about the DPA. Do we need to think about the DPA right now? Like, so it's more for the public to understand what each step is and what the implications are and what we need to be discussing at that time.
There, you know what? Okay, I'll try to answer. Does council need to be thinking about development permitting at this point? Sure, you know, everything's on the table. Any information that council feels like is relevant to their decision, absolutely, staff are here to gather it and provide it to council. You don't even need to justify why you want the information. Just absolutely, we'll get it for you. That said, the purchase and sale agreement does not relate necessarily to the development at all. That would occur once all the land transactions occurred and it's been rezoned and subdivided. So once all that's done, then, you know, in construction, you know, when you're pursuing construction, then that permitting would occur. So it's not absolutely necessary to think about it right now or to figure it all out right now. And I'd say, you know, maybe the developer maybe hasn't even figured it all out right now because they're not anywhere near construction. They're just asking, can we exchange land? And so I might not be able to provide you with all of the answers about development at this point.
Sort of. Let's try this. That staff be directed to create an outline of steps to follow and how the purchase and sale agreement fits into the process. And what items will be decided at the various points in the process? Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I think as the CEO stated, the goalposts are going to move with each stage, depending what happens from a council perspective and a developer perspective. If we keep moving along the process, what we decide might change what the development potentially looks like. So we don't know everything and we can't possibly know everything. There will be more questions from council as we move through each of the steps. So, Councillor Bird?
Through the chair, I do recall seeing a list that was prepared by our CAO about the steps involved. And I guess what Molly is wondering about is that's one thing to have a list of all the steps, but it doesn't tell you much as far as the implications that where it could go this way or that way. Even tonight, we have a decision or a recommendation about a purchase and sale, and we're all struggling with the implications of going one way or the other. I feel like I have most of the information I need, but not all. But part of that is there were implications that were brought up tonight that we need further clarity on. You're going to be looking into that, but the list is there, and I forget exactly where that list is, but I'm sure it's a public document. In fact, one of the first ones I think that went online. Whether that list could be slightly amplified, but as Mayor Hewitt has stated, there are some implications that if you get one implication that went this way up here, it's then you're into these diagrams that if yes, then so, then if no, then yes, you know. So there's a limit to how much we can predict in advance what the implications of each step is going to be.
And we actually don't, I won't say what I was going to say yet because we don't have that motion on the table. So it's not relevant to this discussion. So at this point. So that is information that, now, so we want that to come back to council before it is posted for public information, so we are aware of it first, or do we want that information gathered and put on the public facing portion of the site before council has a chance to look at it and ask questions? I think that's a question that I would have. So does it need to come back to a meeting? And because of the timing of council meetings and with it being Christmas, is council comfortable if we make that recommendation to council, comfortable with just having staff populate that information on the public facing side of that for the South Beach proposal? So, okay, Councillor Brown.
Through the chair, I personally am okay with the public seeing that. We would have access to it once the public has access to it. And it would be a way to expedite this information getting out to the public, so.
Yeah, I was in no way meaning the public wasn't to see it, just whether the public could see it, like it was released to everybody at the same time. And it was whether council felt there, we needed to see it prior to it. Yeah. All right, so you have what you need for the recommendation to go forward to the business when we come out of the committee of the whole.
Can we try reviewing what I have and see if that's meets the council? So right now I've got the staff be directed to create and make public an outline of steps to follow and the implications of decisions at the different steps. And not my best language ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does council feel that that captures your direction adequately, or would you like to spend more time on it?
So that's one part of it, but those other things we're already going to do, or because we're looking at it as just one big thing, right?
Yeah, so the first 3 points on the recommendation was that staff be directed to take clarity regarding the interpretation of the DPA requirements and whether an RV park is permitted within the area of the lakefront protection DPA. And then number 2 is that staff be directed to obtain additional information about including a boat launch in the proposal. Number 3 is that staff be directed to invite the South Beach Working Group to appear as a delegation to council. And then the final one is that staff be directed to create and make public an outline of the steps to follow and the implications of decisions at the different steps.
All right, does someone want to make that recommendation? We don't need a seconder for that because we're in committee of the whole. So moved by Councillor Brown. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion is carried. So then at this point we can so we'll rise and report to council. So can I have a motion to rise from the committee of the whole, moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Lang. All those in favor? Motion is carried. So we'll go back to dealing with 6.1. The purchase and sale agreement between the Village of Kaslo and QP Developments. The recommendation is that staff fully execute a purchase and sale agreement with QP Developments to enable development of their RV park under the conditions detailed in the staff report titled RV Park Proposal Purchase and Sale Agreement dated December 13, 2024. Moved by Councillor Brown.
I would actually like to move the third option, that council will hold a decision in abeyance for us to receive more information that would be required to make a decision. The specific information being what we just asked.
Just asking for clarity on the wording of the motion. It sounds like it's a motion to postpone. Are you looking to postpone to a specific date?
No. Made a motion. Not postponing anything. Nobody's made it. He's just made a motion for option 3.
But is option, so does option, I guess I'll rephrase, does option 3 have a date attached to it, or is it when conditions are met?
Through the chair, it would be when the conditions are met, the specific conditions that we've laid out, so that we have the additional information that we requested, so that we can make a fulsome decision when we're considering this.
So do we have a seconder for that?
Second for discussion.
Discussion, Councilor.
My issue with that is, if we wait for all the conditions to be met without putting any kind of reasonable timeline, then, for instance, South Beach Working Group could postpone ad infinitum. So I think it does require a time, a reasonable time limit.
Through the chair.
Through the chair. I would be happy to put a specific date where we requested that the South Beach Working Group attend as a delegation. And then I think that that's the one aspect that wasn't specifically pertaining to staff alone in terms of getting information and bringing it back to us. So I'd be happy to propose, either January 7th or 14th to the 21st to have a committee of the whole meeting where we invite the South Beach Working Group to attend as a delegation. And then that at the subsequent meeting, being the meeting after that we would then bring this vote.
Okay. So we can't make a motion within a motion, because at this point, you've got your motion was moved and seconded, and we didn't outline the parameters for, other than we wanted it to be available to the public and council at the same time on the website, so that it wasn't conditional. We haven't made that motion, right? We made the recommendation in committee of the whole, but we have not made it in the formal council meeting. So can we table this motion and deal with the recommendation coming out of the committee of the whole, which would then give the parameters for that portion of it? And then that makes the next one more meaningful, and then we can put a date to things.
Yeah, I think you can do it either way, but I think that I'm just looking for, if the resolution is that council holds a decision regarding the purchase of the RV park in abeyance, that's totally fine as a resolution, but it doesn't give us clarity on what to do.
Thank you, Mayor. I might suggest there be a motion to amend the motion in which a specific date is provided, and then that can be seconded, discussed, voted, and might resolve the issue.
So as the mover of the motion, do you want, actually, I did see your hand. Sorry, Councillor Lang, I didn't allow you.
Yeah, he got me completely bamboozled. All we're doing here is making a recommendation to the next council meeting, which would, at that point, we would vote on the recommendation, and then at that point, council could act on the recommendation. And we're already talking the 14th of January before staff is instructed to move ahead with this agreement. So why are we spinning in circles here on this? It seems pretty straightforward to me.
So I'll just state that Councillor Brown was within his rights to make that motion. I read the recommendation and he chose a different option, which was his prerogative, and it was seconded. So that is the motion that we are currently debating, and I'll vote to Councillor Bird.
Through the chair, I answered my own question.
Okay, Councillor Leaflet.
Can I make an amendment then? Amendment,
Yeah.
amendment.
You can propose an amendment to the main motion, yes.
That as far as the purchase and sale agreement, once we get the information that we need for that, then we bring this back to the January 14th meeting.
Okay, so this is attaching the January 14th meeting to the
Right.
date.
To the date, rather,
Right, rather than indefinite.
Right.
Or stipulated. Okay, so do we have a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Bird. On the amendment only for the date, is there any discussion?
Secondary motion.
Oh, you don't.
Secondary motion.
Well, on an amendment, it's an amendment, isn't it? And you can debate an amendment, but only the amended portion of it. So all we're talking about is whether to include the date. And that's all we can debate, is whether.
Yeah. The amendment can be debated.
Okay. So on the amendment, is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Okay, that motion is carried. So back to the main motion with the date of January 14th in there. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Brown.
At this point, I would like to table this motion and talk about a possible delegation with the South Beach working group prior to the 14th. If we're specifically moving this to the 14th, then I would like to table this to make a motion to have a committee of the whole on the 7th, which would be the Tuesday prior, to have this delegation prior to the 14th, where we make it.
Don't think we need to table that because we can have that discussion after this motion. If we're setting that date, you can make a subsequent motion to direct staff to schedule a committee of the whole meeting for reach out to the South Beach working group to see if they could appear January 7th as a delegation. So that gives 3 weeks. We don't entertain speakers from the public during.
It's a legal question.
We don't, yeah, sorry. So on the motion, is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Okay, that motion is carried. And your subsequent motion, Director, or sorry, Councillor Brown?
Through the chair, my subsequent motion would be that staff reach out to the South Beach Working Group to ascertain if Tuesday, January 7th would be a possibility for them to attend as a delegation.
Staff invites the South Beach working group to appear in the delegation at a committee will meeting on January 7th.
We have a second. Second by Councillor Bird. Any discussion? So Councillor Leaflet, did you have discussion?
Yeah, there is a component in the letter from the South Beach group that does talk about QP development. So it would be good to have input from QP about that portion of the letter as well.
So we could, there actually is nothing stopping the South Beach Working Group from communicating directly with the developer rather than us being the go-between and forwarding the correspondence. It is available online. So I don't think we need to, that's my personal opinion. We don't need to be the intermediary. If they have questions for QP, they can communicate directly with QP about that. They're addressing council, not QP during the delegation. And with it.
Conflict with your CAO's schedule for that date, perhaps. The date could be excluded, but the intent of having a committee of the whole before January 14th still. Yeah.
So you'll present some dates and with a 6 p.m. time, because we know that that works for members of council. So are you fine with just having staff then schedule a committee of the whole prior to the 14th? So, we need to amend that motion.
Okay, a friendly amendment.
So, okay. Okay. And is the seconder, okay? All right. So can you read that back just so we're all clear on what it is?
So, the first resolution was the decision to fully execute a purchase and sale agreement with QP Developments as outlined in the December 13th, 2024 staff report titled RV Park Proposal Purchase and Sale Agreement, be held in abeyance until January 14th, 2025. And then the second is that staff invite the South Beach Working Group to appear as a delegation at a committee of the whole meeting prior to January 14th, 2025.
Okay, any further discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. All right. Any other motions before I move on to the next item of business? So if you, I'll give you a chance to leave if you don't want to stay for the rest of the business, but you are welcome to do so. That will be a bit disruptive if a bunch of people are getting up and leaving. Thank you all for attending, taking an interest.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Hey, bye, everybody online who is choosing to leave. Not that you have to. Okay. All right. So our next item of business is the Kaslo Aerodrome Regulation Bylaw. And did you want to speak to that?
Thank you, Mayor Hewitt. Just for that.
Oh, is it? Okay. All right, then I don't need you to speak to it. So the recommendation is that the Kaslo Aerodrome Regulation Bylaw 1309/2024 be adopted by Councillor Leafwood and seconded by Councillor Bird. All those in favor? It's carried. And reserve transfers. The recommendation is that council approve the 2024 reserve fund transfers as presented in the staff report 2024 reserve transfers dated December 13th, 2024. Moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Leafwood. Any discussion? All those in favor? It's carried. And our late item is the Curling Club grant. The recommendation is that council authorize payment of $1,100 to the Kaslo Curling Club to offset the cost of purchasing any curling rocks. And actually, I'll let you explain for it's a flow through, correct?
This is a flow through grant, and so we have received the funds. And the funder has directed us to award the funds to the Kaslo Curling Club for the purchase, offset the cost of purchasing curling rocks. But we can't do that without a resolution from council to authorize that allocation of funds.
Okay, so moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Leafwood. Any discussion? Other than they're nice. They're about 6 pounds heavier and they move totally differently than the old ones. It's great. Hard to get used to, but okay, all those in favor? Motion is carried. So that brings us to the end of our meeting. So now I have a motion to adjourn at 8:44, made by Councillor Brown. All those in favor? Motion is carried.